Dave Sobel here at IT Nation Connect, the opportunity for a bonus episode to sit down with Ken Carnesi, the co-founder and CEO of DNSfilter. Ken, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Appreciate it.
I was fascinated to talk to you on two areas, particularly on DNSfilter. One of the things DNSfilter has really leaned into is AI as part of it. Now, I want to unpack a little bit about what that AI means, because I understand you're doing a lot with it, and I want to make sure I get through the marketing to actually tell me a little bit more about how that works and what kind of intelligence you've brought to the product.
That's a good question. There's even a big push to use it internally in the company this year. But as far as with regards to like the threat intel, I actually try to split it into two different areas. There's the stuff we generate on our own, and then there's the stuff that others bring in, right? So DNSfilter, unlike much like rather any other kind of DNS-based solution, we're going to ingest like third-party feeds and so forth to tell us what's good, what's bad, right? So we bring in about 100 of those different third-party feeds. The challenge with that for anybody who brings in more than one is that they rarely agree with each other, right? So you could have potentially 100, well, probably not 100 differing opinions, but two or three different options across 100 different, permutations, right? So we actually leverage machine learning that we built on one side to just look at those feeds and kind of determine, based on a bunch of different heuristics, which one of those feeds is correct, that this is or is not a threat. So that's sort of one half of how we use it. On the other side is what we do in-house completely. So that's been something we've been working on since before it was even like a buzz phase, I'll say, in 2018. We initially started out using it for domain categorization, so that would say this is a shopping site or a news site, a porn site, whatever it may be, to determine, if you want to block those types of things. Since then, in the last few years, we've expanded that to threat identification. So basically, as customer traffic flows through, they request new domains we haven't seen before. That triggers our AI, our machine learning, to go crawl and categorize those sites and figure it out on 100, I believe it's about 150 different heuristics. This is good, this is bad. So at this point, we're identifying about 70% of the threats that we block. We identify them ourselves through that, proprietary machine learning. First, maybe like it's on average about 10 days faster than we might see it on one of those different feeds. So yeah, that's.
So that actually, the reason I wanted to ask about that is that sets a little bit of a tone to give me your perspective. As someone who's been using this and teaching models and getting escalation, what are you finding that the models are particularly great at doing? And what are you finding that they're not very good at doing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, so we operate not just in the United States, for one thing. We operate in, I think we have 100 customers in 195 different countries.
So most on the planet.
I don't even know how many there are, but there's more than that, so not everything yet. But we have obviously a lot of different languages we have to deal with. So that's actually kind of one big challenge in the first place is you're not going to just there are certain parts of the model that are going to flow through images, things like that, malware, stuff like that. But running through translation layer, it's not that simple. So, handling, I think, translation and nuances between languages, especially some of the ones that may be less popular, definitely a challenge for sure. And then also sort of anything new, right? Like mimicking output of a human, that tends to be kind of difficult. Like it requires a lot of different training. You would think it's not just training on what's bad, but you actually have to do a lot of training on what's good. And often that's through like human-led interactions where, you'd have to say, you did a bad job categorizing this site or this domain, and it's because of X, Y, Z. Or you did a good job, and it actually needs positive reinforcement to be told why. So, the challenge there, though, is that it takes thousands and thousands of these kind of repetitive trainings just to improve, simple behavior.
So I'm also curious, the other area I would think that you've also got an interesting set of insight into is content moderation, because you've got to make determinations about what content is like. And this is an area that there's a lot of subtlety to it. When you think about the idea of we talk about sex broadly, right? Okay, well then we could have it in, there's medical versions of that. There's versions that are acceptable in conversations.
Yep.
There's guns that are potentially cultural choices. There's a whole wide variety of that. And so give me a little bit of the lessons you've learned about thinking about that framework. And I'm particularly interested in understanding that because a lot of what we're talking about now is data classification. This is an area where you have a lot of experience in thinking about how that works. What are some of the things you've learned around content?
Yeah, well, first off, you're absolutely right. So that is definitely a challenge, especially when it comes to images, right? Because I don't know, honestly, like when you're identifying like pornographic sites, for example, through machine learning, a lot of times it's image analysis, and if there's a lot of skin, for example, that could trigger something that may or may not fall into that category. But really, honestly, that's not a part that we have a great answer for. I mean, it comes down to a human team still. We have a security intelligence team at DNSfilter, and, part of their mandate is, of course, the domain categorization outside of threats, too. So we really try to have just a broad range of thinking and beliefs on the team so that they can have educated conversations amongst themselves. And then, if they can't agree on it, they'll kind of bring it to the executive team and we'll try to assist. But it's really actually when it gets very, very nuanced, it comes down to a debate, really. Okay. I have to be honest.
Well, you've actually, that's interesting because what you've led me to one of the questions that I often like to talk to about leaders, and I think this might also be a way, how do you approach decisions? Like, I would think that there's a way, this is a great example of the kind of decisions as a leader you're going to have to get involved with. Do you have like a particular framework for thinking about decision making that you apply?
I think we all just kind of keep each other in check. I don't know that there's really a framework. It's actually a lot more straightforward than you think most of the time. I believe where it's been a bigger challenge, for example, because I keep tying to the adult content,
sure,
is actually more recently has been everything that we saw with all the elections, actually, because there was a ton of election interference going on. There's a lot of what might be considered fake news or news that is trustworthy or not. That's where it came into play a lot.
Interesting.
Recently, so the good thing is we actually keep good tabs with government agencies, government partners and everything who will feed us lists of what is, misinformation or maybe somebody who's trying to go, modify an outcome or an election result or, opinion based or something like that. So a lot of that gets given to us. But you do have a lot of the confusion tends to come from customer tickets, actually, where a customer might go and say, believe it or not, we get a lot that'll be like CNN's fake news or something like that. And you're like, well, that's pretty clear that you may disagree with it. It's not fake news. But we just really have to keep each other in check. It's hard to have a framework around it because you never know what's going to come in.
Gotcha. I'd actually you brought it up, and so I'm really interested to get your perspective then on kind of that as a leader in public-private partnership there. Like, how are you finding working with your security counterparts in public sector? Like, are there particular agencies you're working with, and how do those relationships work?
Yeah. So nothing really direct and official, I would say. It's interesting. Like the leaders, a lot of those agencies, they do want a good outcome. They want to keep us safe. They don't want these things to happen. But lawyers get involved, let's say, and there's a lot of red tape, a lot of issues. So there's been some really big leaders in the industry, I'll say, that get us all together into a particular group where you might see, leaders from DNSfilter, other filtering companies, ISPs, telcos, cybersecurity companies, and we actually, a lot of these lists are built just communicating with each other in a Slack channel. It's an invitation to a community that you kind of have to earn your way into, and that tends to mean you're a trusted party, you're not introducing too much bias or anything like that. And, obviously there might be somebody from an agency in there potentially saying, hey, just take a look at this and make a decision of what you think. But yeah, it's really more the private part of a public-private partnership that's getting this all done.
Interesting. And I'm glad you gave me some insight into that because it's another example of community work, particularly at a conference where we're talking about a lot of that. And I'm going to use that to sort of pivot a little bit to something you and I were talking about before the broadcast. And I'm really curious to get your take on. You've got a lot of thinking around the idea of kind of this dynamic that I'm looking at now between platform plays in the MSP space and integration plays. Because one of the things we've been hearing here at IT Nation is they're leaning very much into this idea of a MSP platform. You were at Kaseya's DattoCon last week. It's another area where they're talking about, very much a platform play. Now, without necessarily having to talk about specific platforms, I'd really like to talk about it from a strategy perspective, because that's one set of approaches. And then the other generalized thought on this is the idea of bringing together, integrating products, potentially bringing best of breed style positions together. Tell me about how you're thinking about those two approaches as you're looking at the marketplace.
Sure. Well, I'd have to say that this is maybe new to the MSP space, but it's been something that I've had to deal with for years outside the MSP space, because we service other organizations too, of course. And you see it with, like, for example, if you think about Cisco is a big one for us, right? Cisco Umbrella is a big competitor. You have a lot of like these, what you would consider SASE plays in the space.
Okay.
And we're always having to fight against that, because it's like, if you're going to go buy something and that company makes a bunch of other different aspects that probably make up a complete package, let's say, it tends to be more cost effective, of course. So I've always been taking the approach of more of the best in breed, like you're talking about.
Okay.
In the MSP space particularly, I think that it is kind of we have a really big responsibility in the MSP space, and I mean we as in all of us, the MSPs most especially. You're actually a very big part of critical national infrastructure, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah.
There's a big responsibility, in my opinion, to be operating at the highest level of security effectiveness that we can. So I just, I don't think that there's something inherently bad necessarily with these platform plays, but I think that I get concerned when you hear a lot about margin and cost. I'll say, lower cost, higher margin. That's the pitch of pretty much any platform play. And when you see people getting into the space that really themselves as a larger organization may not even have a background in cybersecurity originally, it just, I think, should introduce the question more frequently of what is actually powering these sort of these platform plays that didn't exist yesterday or a couple weeks ago or something, and they exist today. That doesn't mean it's bad. I'm not here to say it's bad. It could be better than DNSfilter, sure, for all I know. But I think, it does beg the question of, like, there are things to consider other than price. And for me, I think we have a very big responsibility in that space.
So I don't disagree, because I'm with you in terms of the fact that we need to be collectively working toward more security, broadly. There's also the question then at the appropriate level of security. And I really like to get your sense of framework on that, because you talk about being the best, the best in class and best in class. That would mean different things for different customers. I'm going to use two entirely extreme examples intentionally, right? So on the high end, I could have the CIA and classified information at the highest levels, right? Like we talk about, that has a particular security profile. And then if I take a small retail business that is purely selling transactional bits in an area that is non-classified, that is non-secure, that isn't healthcare or regulated industry, like I can have a big spectrum, and there's all the things in between. How do you think about matching that when, because best in breed, best in class sounds great, but how do I match the right one to the right problem, and how do you measure that?
That's a really good question. Nobody's actually ever asked me that before, but I think I have a decent answer, and that's if I put myself into the shoes of the MSP,
okay,
I think it comes down to what it is you're protecting a little bit, for sure, but also, like, what is the worst case scenario of providing not a good level of protection. In an ideal world, I think, if you have high standard of conduct, let's say, hopefully as an MSP, you're not going to provide inadequate protection to a customer. and you should walk away if they're not willing to pay for that. I believe let somebody else take that on who's willing. But maybe you kind of have to offer that to the customer a little bit if you can, of inform them, like, there's a good, there's a better, there's a best, or something like that. But what I mean by what you're protecting is like that, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to understand, like at the high level, some sort of, healthcare type material, CIA, stuff like that, classified material, manufacturing stuff. That's all really, really potentially critical stuff that you want to protect, right? But that doesn't mean that always that information getting out is going to have a different impact to the business or to the person that you're protecting, if that makes sense. Like if somebody's personal information gets out, somebody, a small business who maybe operates on really thin margins, they may only make $100,000 a year or something like that, bringing it in, but, they only have $5,000 in their bank account at any given point in time. That $5,000 not worth so much compared to maybe some of the other customers you might be protecting. But to them, losing that $5,000, that might be a life-changing event. So I just think, you have to consider what you're protecting. Maybe not just... Yeah.
Oh, it makes sense. You've given a lot of different qualifiers in there because it is the analysis of their specific needs and match to the level of product. It's a really interesting way to put that. So as I'm sort of wrapping, one of the things I've liked talking about with guests, particularly here, is so we're talking the November timeframe of 2024.
Yep.
We're all sort of thinking about what next year looks like. Give me sort of the one thing you're tracking to say this is what I'm looking to see, sort of as a interesting thing for 2025, a trend that you're really closely following.
Yeah, I think it's absolute. I mean, I'm assuming you mean in the cyberspace, or just
mean it intentionally broadly.
Intentionally broadly. There's a lot of things. I think that personally, I'm curious to see what next year looks like from a business perspective for everybody. I think that we've all felt like that things have slowed down a little bit this past year. It's been tough. I'm relatively new in business, I'll say, or at least operating at this level. But, everybody feels it. I hear maybe it's just because it's an election year. It always happens. I don't know. So that's top of my mind, of course, because I'm trying to grow a business here. From a security standpoint, definitely, I think that the AI stuff is really interesting to me. I mean, I'm using that intentionally broadly too, but I'm very curious to see the proliferation of it and how it's going to affect so many different things in the cyberspace, both on the good guy side and on the bad guy side. I think there's a lot of really interesting use cases that we have to find in terms of detection and automation within the businesses. And I'm just curious to see. I think it's going to be the first year where it's going to become really, I mean, it's already pretty accessible, but I can see trying to roll it out in my own company through different teams that not everybody's like fully grasping it yet. It's not fully accessible to everybody. I think that's going to change a lot this year, particularly with it being included in like iOS devices. And I think 18.2 is coming up soon. It's going to be ChatGPT integration. I mean, I'm just really, really excited to see how that's going to pan out, because I'm spending an inordinate amount of my time talking to ChatGPT lately and building out all sorts of tools at work. I mean, I think people hate me at work now.
I think you're investing a little bit in productivity, and that is a positive note we're going to leave it on. Ken, really appreciate you joining me today. This has been fascinating.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Are you ready to get your brand in front of the tech leaders shaping the future of managed services? Here at the Business of Tech, we offer flexible sponsorship opportunities to meet your needs, whether it's live show sponsorship, podcast advertising, event promotion, or custom webinars. From affordable exposure options to exclusive sponsorships, our offerings are designed to fit businesses and vendors of all sizes looking to make an impact. Prices start at just $500 per month, making our packages a fraction of typical event sponsorship costs. Be a part of the conversation that matters to IT service providers worldwide. Join us at MSP Radio and amplify your message where it counts. Visit mspradio.com/engage today to explore all the ways we can help you grow. The Business of Tech is written and produced by me, Dave Sobel, under ethics guidelines posted at businessof.tech. If you like the content, please make sure to hit that like button and follow or subscribe. It's free and easy and the best way to support the show and help us grow. You can also check out our Patreon, where you can join the Business of Tech community at patreon.com/MSP Radio, or buy our Why Do We Care merch at businessof.tech. Finally, if you're interested in advertising on the show, visit mspradio.com/engage. Once again, thanks for listening to me, and I will talk to you again on our next episode of The Business of Tech.
Part of the MSP Radio Network.